All right, what is going on, Chiefs Kingdom? Welcome back to the KC Sports Report. Michael Darcy, your host here as always, and tonight I have the pleasure of having my good friend Lucas Murphy on the show, and we're going to discuss if the Chiefs are going to be trading for a top-tier wide receiver at some point this offseason. So, Lucas, we just got a report from Diana Rossini. This got reported on SportsCenter that the Chiefs are actively making phone calls to try and trade for another top wide receiver. Now, obviously, Chiefs Twitter was sent into a frenzy. They love this idea, and it's going to spark a lot of different options. And you got guys throwing out there that, the Chiefs might trade for DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett or Deebo Samuel. But what are your initial thoughts of this report? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? And who are some wide receivers that you could potentially see getting traded to the Chiefs?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely ecstatic about it. I'm super pumped about it. I think the report comes at a perfect time. I mean, the owners are at the owners meeting, coaches are there. It's very lax, so there's a lot more, I guess, how they talk and is a little bit different than, answering to the media. So for Diana Rossini to kind of get this message from whoever, it makes sense, but it also creates an exciting time for Chiefs Kingdom. Especially when it sounds like they're actively calling almost everybody. She made it even sound like teams that you wouldn't anticipate being involved in a trade, they're calling them too. So I think it's very exciting. And then that really just leads to who is possible and what are they really asking for that, in return. And there's a lot of guys out there. And, the more common ones that we're seeing, I think, are probably the ones that would be more realistic. But then there's also other ones that are highly, highly regarded that the Chiefs could potentially pry away. Some of the names that I've obviously seen are like Tyler Lockett. You mentioned DK Metcalf, Scary Terry McLaurin, Laviska Shenault's been rumored to the Kansas City Chiefs. But then I've also seen some things of like A.J. Brown, DJ Moore. I even potentially mentioned like Adam Thielen being an option because, he restructured and, the Minnesota Vikings could be not necessarily an elite team. So, man, there's a lot. Like, even the Chicago Bears could be something that we look at. Or it's just endless opportunities, man. It's just what is it going to cost and what those contracts look like. One thing I do want to really kind of emphasize real quick before we move on is I think people need to understand that the Kansas City Chiefs tried to pay Tyreek Hill as a top receiver. He wanted more money. And in our opinion, he wanted out of Kansas City. He wanted to go play for Miami, where he basically works out where he lives. A lot of his, family is in Miami, so it made sense to why he wanted to go there. But at no point did the Kansas City Chiefs not want to pay their star-studded one-of-one wide receiver, basically gadget tool that they have. They wanted to pay him, and they wanted to pay him very good. It's just it didn't work out. So the Kansas City Chiefs are willing to pay big money for a top talented receiver, and that would kind of coincide with exactly what Diana Rossini's reporting.
I agree, and you hit it on the head with the whole Tyreek Hill thing. The Chiefs wanted to pay him, and he chose elsewhere. He wanted out of Kansas City for whatever reason. Maybe it's just that he likes Miami more than Kansas City, which I can't really blame him on that, but he did not want to be a member of the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's a tough pill for a lot of Chiefs fans to swallow. But it also shows that the Chiefs do have this cap space now available. Now, I will say, I don't know how smart it is to trade for a DK Metcalf or a Terry McLaurin when they're only under contract for one more year. So you're going to have to pay those guys after this year. So why trade a very valuable draft asset to get a guy that you're going to have to pay next year in free agency anyway? So that almost makes me think that this report could be taken in this context. Maybe they're calling all these different teams to find out what it would take to trade up in the draft to get their guy. Jameson Williams is going to be a superstar. I've seen a lot of comparisons to a Tyreek Hill and the way that he moves and the way that he can kind of change a game. Now, obviously, no one's Tyreek Hill, but I think that this report could be taken in a sense that maybe the Chiefs are trying to put themselves in the best position to go up and get the right guy for this offense. But, I wouldn't really have a problem with any of these guys, but again, I don't want to see the Chiefs give up draft capital when they're going to have to pay him next year, and, why trade for a guy this year when you can get him next year in free agency? You know what I mean? And I think that in the draft, you're going to have your chance to get pretty much whoever you want if you can trade up. So that's what I think this report might mean. But the option that I think makes the most sense at wide receiver, if they are trying to trade for one, would be Tyler Lockett. I think Tyler Lockett fits what the Chiefs want to do. He's not the DK Metcalf premier wide receiver that he once was, so that might be why the Seahawks are trying to get rid of him. But I can't see the Chiefs signing, or I guess trading for Deebo Samuel or DK Metcalf or anybody of that elite stature.
I feel like you read my article that I wrote over at kcsportsreport.com. As everyone that's listening to this should be heading over there right now to find out exactly who I talked about.
That was a great plug, by the way.
Yeah, I've been working on that.
Oh, I know. I can tell.
Tyler Lockett, ladies and gentlemen, has huge ties to Kansas City. His dad, Kevin Lockett, played in Kansas City 4 out of his 7 career years that he played in the NFL. Those were with Kansas City. Had a tremendous, career in Kansas City. Tyler Lockett attends Kansas State, is an absolute freak wide receiver coming out of K-State, and obviously he's drafted to the Seahawks in the 3rd round with pick number 69. In 7 seasons with the Seahawks, Lockett's played in 111 games, starting 87 of those. He really hasn't honestly missed any games at all in his entire tenure with the Seahawks. He's been targeted 625 times, catching 449 receptions for 6,067 yards. What's awesome is he's averaging 13.5 yards per reception. He scored 45 receiving touchdowns and has an astounding 71.8% catch percentage in his career. Michael, that's 71.8% catch rate in his entire career.
That's really good.
Yeah. I think Tyler Lockett, and he's not going to be as expensive as a DK Metcalf because he did recently sign a contract with the Seahawks. So I think he is an older receiver, but I think in all honesty, I think that's kind of where the Chiefs are leaning towards because they do have 12 picks in this draft. They are going to address receiver at some point in this draft. I do agree with you. I think that there's a lot of things that could be kind of thrown up as a smokescreen because I do think that there's a chance they could be looking to trade up to get a receiver. But I also think that, they could be looking at this as an opportunity to go out and get a wide receiver who's experienced and addressing, we've talked about, the defense to its fullest scale through this draft. Tyler Lockett is definitely one that I really like. I mentioned Terry McLaurin. I think when it comes to a possibility, I think this is a least likely option just because the Commanders are still trying to build up. He is still very young, and he could easily get thrown a huge bag of money by them. And they, they're obviously going to be looking to go get drafted quarterback. So I think, for Terry McLaurin's situation, plus he's had 8 different quarterbacks throw to him in 3 seasons, that's tough. And so, it'll be interesting to see how that is handled. And I think for the right price, anybody can be had. I mean, we saw Tyreek Hill, who I thought was not going to be traded ever, and he is traded. So maybe the right price, McLaurin ends up in a Chiefs uniform. Another one that a lot of people are kind of starting to fade away off of, but has been rumored probably the most, has been Laviska Shenault. Kid coming out of Colorado, was an absolute stud, is a very physical runner. I talked about it on my podcast, The Beat of KC, how he kind of reminds me a little bit of Devontae Adams when it comes to running routes. Like his upper body doesn't necessarily tell you a direction he's going to break or how he's going to maneuver in his routes. He does have a Juju Smith-Schuster type of physicality. I mean, Juju lowered his shoulder and leveled the defender and broke his forearm last year. Laviska plays with that exact kind of mentality. I'm a huge fan of his. I think he has such a huge upside. And, I mean, we got to remember, too, he's played with the Jaguars, a very similar situation to Terry McLaurin. Like, not a whole lot of success in the organization. And he's had multiple quarterbacks thrown to him, too, and they finally got Trevor Lawrence, and it just doesn't seem to be clicking. So I think Shenault would fit well with probably the best quarterback in the NFL in Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and the great thing about this report is it sounds like the Chiefs are just picking up the phone and calling anybody. It doesn't matter who you have or what you want, but the least you can do is call because you never know what you could find out. Like the Chiefs might be able to get a great deal or or get a player in Kansas City that they did not expect. And I think that, a lot of people might read this and think, oh, the Chiefs are trying to get that number one guy. But like I said, they might just trying to be trading up in the draft, or maybe they're going to get a number 2 or 3 wide receiver that they can just add to this receiving group and go into the draft and draft another one. Because I think that whether or not they trade for a number 1 wide receiver, they're going to draft one. I don't know when it would be, but if they don't make this trade for a big name wide receiver, they're going to draft one in the first round. And it almost makes you wonder that if you were trying to get a scary Terry McLaurin or a DK Metcalf, if you'd have to bundle those first round picks to get them. And I don't think that's a good idea. I understand the Chiefs have 12 draft picks and they've got a lot of capital to work with. I don't want to see them give up a lot for a wide receiver that you're going to have to pay, and they're going to be hitting free agency next year. So I just don't see the point in it personally, but I like the idea of calling around, at least seeing what these teams are willing to do, and maybe the Chiefs can get like a Tyler Boyd or somebody like that might not be that elite tier 1 receiver, but he would complement this offense really well.
I 100% agree with you, and I think that is a selling point that the Chiefs could really kind of convey to these teams, like, hey, you haven't locked these guys up, and they're going to be hitting free agency next year. And there's a huge chunk of them. That's what's crazy. So I think that the Chiefs could kind of have some leverage. Hey, we can give you this draft pick. It's going to be a lot younger. Here, it's enticing. Give us this, and we'll try to work out a deal with that individual. I think that's a good option. But, man, I know this is a draft kind of about trades and things like that, but, when you're really talking about first-round talent or even just what's going on in the second and third round of this draft, I mean, you have guys like Jamison Williams, which we mentioned, Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, 2 guys from Ohio State, and Olave and Wilson. But then you also have guys like Sky Moore, John Mechie, who's coming off of an injury, Christian Watson, who's 6'4" and runs a 4.3 and is just a monster, George Pickens from Georgia, who is just an animal from Georgia. I think that there is enough top-tier wide receivers in this draft to go ahead and just make those selections and see if they work out and perform to an elite level and try to replicate the numbers and the statistics that Tyreek Hill put up.
I agree.
I don't think you're ever going to replace him. You're not. You're just not going to replace who Tyreek Hill was, but you can replace those stats. And I would much rather this be addressed through the draft and then approach those wide receivers in the offseason next year.
I could not agree more. Sorry, go ahead. I keep cutting you off.
No, you're good, man. And if they make a move, am I going to be disappointed? No, most definitely not, because I know it would be with good intentions. But I think you and I are on the same page. Like, let's address it in the draft and then really attack this next year.
Couldn't agree more. As I said while you were talking, I think that the Chiefs need to address this in the draft. If they trade for a good piece, great. Don't give up a lot of draft capital and see what we're like next year, because next offseason, we're going to have a lot more cap space, a lot more of an idea of where this team is at. And I think that you can wait on that kind of trade or wait for these guys to hit free agency, and that's when you can make your good offer. But, getting off of the receivers, because I think that we answered that question fairly well, I want to talk about something that happened today. I guess when you're seeing this, it'll be yesterday. The NFL adjusted the overtime rules. And I want to start off by saying I have no problem with that. I thought the overtime rules were broken. They weren't good. I personally am under the impression that both teams should touch the ball in overtime because that makes it the most fair. But what pisses me off about this rule change is the fact that the Chiefs tried to do this back when they lost to the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. And all of these teams, specifically the Bills, said no. And just when the Bills lose with 13 seconds left in regulation, they go into overtime and our offense just wipes the floor with their defense. Their number 1 scoring defense. Then they want the rule changed. That's my problem. It's just, we had a chance to do this 2.5 years ago, and they just said no. So that's kind of why I'm mad about this rule change. I think it's a good rule. I like what the NFL is trying to do because the rules were broken previously. But it really makes me mad that they did this because the Bills thought it was unfair. And all these other NFL teams said, hey, it would be more fair if we all touched the ball. And the Chiefs did this over 2 years ago. Lucas, what do you think about that?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's frustrating because, like you said, the Chiefs tried it, attempted it, shot down, and then it's almost like, oh, okay, now we'll take it into consideration. I do think one positive of this is the fact that it's strictly just going to be playoff related. It's not going to be regular season. And so once the playoffs roll around, both teams will touch it, but it won't really have a hindrance on the regular season. And I mean, I guess that could also be a conflict because that could have playoff implications if a team doesn't get the chance to get the football in overtime. And we're seeing how the AFC West is developing. Who knows? Maybe that could have a huge impact, and we could be like, hey, we wish, overtime rules were set in place in the regular season. I just think that it's so hard for the NFL to kind of, I guess, compromise or change some of their old ways. Like, I've always been in favor of overtime being exactly how college is addressed. I think it makes it a lot more fun. It becomes a lot more of a challenge. And I think you could still even change those rules a little bit. But, eventually maybe that happens. But right now, at least we made some change, and I'm accepting of that. But I do agree. This should have been done when the Chiefs requested it. But because it was the Chiefs, it didn't happen.
Like I said, I love the idea. It's a great proposal. I love the rule. It's just really annoying that when the Chiefs had this happen to them, nobody thought twice. But when it happened to a different team, everyone got pissed off. Everyone said, we need to change this rule, even though the Chiefs suffered through this 2 years ago. So that's my thoughts on that. But really quickly, let's also talk about more news that happened. So again, Chiefs Twitter was in a frenzy. There was talks about moving Arrowhead, not moving Arrowhead, but moving the Chiefs Stadium to Kansas instead of Missouri. And you see guys on Twitter just freak out like, oh, you can't do this and whatnot. This was so minor to me, I didn't even respond to it. I think that the Chiefs are not planning on moving. They're not going to leave Arrowhead. The tradition there is unlike anything else. They're doing this purely to get tax money to fund the area around Arrowhead Stadium and maybe make adjustments to Arrowhead Stadium, but they're not going to move, guys. And even if they did, I mean, no, I'm not even going to say that because I don't want them to move, but I just think this idea to begin with is stupid.
I'm kind of torn. I live in Kansas. I actually live relatively close to where the rumor of the team potentially going is. I would be all for the Kansas City Chiefs moving to Wyandotte County or even the Kansas side. We would welcome you. Johnson County, I'm sure, would do the same. But I do understand, and this is where, like, to me, I really didn't care about the whole idea because Arrowhead is Arrowhead. If it's in Kansas, it's going to be the loudest outdoor stadium in the NFL. If it stays where it's at, it's going to be the loudest outdoor stadium in the NFL. The reason is because Chiefs Kingdom is who's going to be packing that stadium. I think tailgating is going to be the same no matter where it is. I do think there's a historical aspect to Arrowhead. We've seen 4 consecutive AFC championships there. We've seen Patrick Mahomes start his career there. The Ring of Honor, I think we've seen players go through, what the Chiefs have done and have earned their way to the Ring of Honor. I immediately thought to myself, I attended a Garth Brooks concert inside Arrowhead, and that's a memory I'm always going to have. And then obviously right next door is Kauffman Stadium, which they're rumored to obviously be moving downtown too.
I was just about to bring that up. Like, I think that has a much better chance of happening because I think John Sherman's all about trying to go downtown and make it an experience and have the shops around and all that kind of stuff. I think that will happen actually, but I don't want to move Arrowhead Stadium.
No, and I it's not necessarily that I want to move it or I'm like actively like, well, we got to move it, but I can see some benefits to it, and it's exactly what I mentioned on Twitter. Guys, Drury Inn across from Kauffman Stadium isn't something flashy. Like, people aren't going to Arrowhead to go to Drury Inn. They're not going to the local BP gas station. Like, you have
There's
to
the Taco Bell across the street. There's a Denny's,
correct.
too.
You have to understand what's surrounding Truman Sports Complex. It's not flashy. There's nothing at all that's attractive. Like, it doesn't even bring in people. And I think that's honestly what they're going to have to work on. So, yeah, I do think it's a selling point. I think it's a way to get Missouri to climb on board with aiding in paying for basically a new facility around it, and definitely upgrading. I could even see them potentially putting a retractable roof on an Arrowhead. Not that would hinder like the environment or what Arrowhead's about, but I do think that would also improve the ability to potentially get a Super Bowl in Kansas City. Like I just had an interview with another individual. We talked about, potentially having a Final Four opportunity in Arrowhead. I think there's a lot of things that can come with that. So I think that's exactly kind of wrap it back around to what you said. I think it was exactly a selling point, but I do think that there is a small chance that it could happen. The only thing I also want to emphasize is that the owner of this team is Lamar Hunt, who basically founded everything. This is his kingdom. He built this. I don't know that his son is going to want to up and just move everything that his father basically created, and that's something we have to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, I just think, all right, it's news, I guess, but I don't think they're going to follow through with this. They're going to be at Arrowhead, and if they are going to build a new stadium, it's not going to be fully built till like 2025 or 2026, even if they started like tomorrow. So I'm not concerned about this. We'll think about it and address it later if it does happen. But Chiefs Kingdom, I don't think you have anything to worry about. So, Lucas, it was a great episode tonight. We got through 3 major topics. Where can the people find you?
Guys, I'm telling you, we are absolutely killing it over at kcsportsreport.com. Please head over there, show some support, show some love. I want to plug the article I just wrote about the actively looking for top wide receivers. Just put that article up today. Head over there, and I do anticipate creating another mock draft article very soon, especially with these new picks that we acquired. So head over to kcsportsreport.com. You can also find me at Inside the Royals through Fan Nation. I have a few articles coming out. Tomorrow is going to be on Hunter Dozier. Well, I guess when you guys are watching this, it'll be today. So
you can go find it.
Yeah, talking about that. And then also a podcast that I do with Jacob Milham. Absolutely love it. The Royals Rundown, having all kinds of guests. Please go over there, support that up-and-coming podcast. And the final place is going to be, actually, I got one more now, but Blue Wings Rising through Fan Nation, Kansas Jayhawks, if you're a Kansas fan, head over there. Been talking a lot of football and obviously the Final Four run. And then I just recently started up my own podcast again. It's called The Beat of KC. I plan on having a bunch of guests on, and I've kind of started that back up. So head on over there. You can find it on any podcast platform. It's my face as a caricature. Please help me out. Just show some love and support. It means a lot to me. Whew, that's a lot, man.
Yeah. Like I said, you were busy before you started back up the Beat of KC, so you are constantly busy, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done on kcsportsreport.com. If you guys haven't already, go click the link in the description. Go over to kcsportsreport.com and subscribe for the newsletter. You get all of the articles that come out, and specifically because we're having some problems with the website, which Lucas is going to yell at me for because I understand there's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked out. But if you go subscribe, that's free to do. All you got to do is put your email in. And as for me, you can follow me on Twitter. That is at KC Sports Report. Instagram is KC_Sports Report. I appreciate you guys for laboring through me on this video. There is a thunderstorm / tornado / hailstorm. So the fact that we are sitting right here and the whole building hasn't collapsed yet is a major win by itself. And so with that being said, guys, I appreciate you watching this video. Thanks for watching, and go Chiefs.